Dave, thank you for coming in and
James.
joining us. And I do apologise, we probably pulled you away from what was the best fishing conditions. I think 984 in pressure, strong southwesterly winds, and you're fresh from K1 this morning.
You actually pulled me away from, I did 48 hours and the fish started showing 2 hours before I had to leave. I recast all 3 singles on them and they were still showing, and I'm looking thinking, how can I stretch another 10 minutes, another 10 minutes, another 10 minutes? But yeah, I blanked.
No good. Has things been going over on K1 recently?
Yeah, I mean, I've mainly been on Raspberry 1 for the winter, and I dropped. It was busy when I turned up, so I dropped on K1. I've not been on there for a while, but there was a 40-pounder out while I was there, and a couple of others. So yeah.
So has it started picking up a little bit? Because it seems like a few bites are doing the circuit at the moment. There's been a lot of big fish coming out recently.
Yeah. I mean, you look on the socials and that, and there seems to be fish coming out here, there, and everywhere. But those 2 lakes, the Raspberry lakes, they fish. You know, I include Kingsmead in the Raspberry sort of complex. They fish very well in the winter because they get fished heavily, they get a lot of bait, they get a lot of pressure, and the fish keep moving, and they're quite heavily stocked. So they fish well all winter, really, to be honest.
Because we have, I mean, this winter's really been a weird one. Although it's been fairly mild, the pressures have been astronomical.
Yeah.
Has that affected your fishing, would you say? Or?
They're a bit of an anomaly, really, these lakes. I think because they get so much food, they just feed.
Yeah.
And really high pressures fish quite well this winter.
Okay.
You know, there's been some big hits out of Raspberry 1. It's very swimmy. So you say you've got the middle section, and there'll be 4 different swims, and the fish tend to be in this side. So these 2 swims will fish for a week, and then they'll be over the other side. So it's all about location on the day, really. But guys have had hits of 10 fish. I had 6 in 24 hours myself.
Wow. Yeah. And when you, just quickly, I know we're going to talk about line today, so I do apologise, but with pressures, just quickly touching on that, do you find shallow waters fish better, or the shallower areas fish better in high pressure?
Not shallow areas on lakes that have got various depths, you know, maybe higher in the water column, you know, zigging and stuff. But I think shallower waters I prefer for winter in general. I think they react to the differences in temperature and pressure and that a lot quicker. So yeah, I do prefer shallower waters normally, but the Raspberry lakes are quite deep. Average, I suppose, 15 foot, something like that. But no, I think that they fish because of the bait, because of the pressure, because of the angular pressure, not the air pressure. That's what keeps them ticking over, and that's the way I like to do it in the winter. Is pick a water that's realistic for the winter, and then do the wild thing in the spring, summer, and autumn.
Yeah, because I mean, you think these fish are so big now for a reason.
Yeah,
they eat.
Oh yeah,
you know, and it's a reason they're going to carry on eating to sustain that weight.
They're bred to grow as well, aren't they?
100% nowadays.
They're fast-growing fish. They get there really, really quick. There's some huge fish around that complex now.
It is
huge.
They're really doing very well over there.
Yeah. Oh god, yeah. And different strains as well. You've got your VSs. You've got some of your Simos still going, which are usually the bigger ones of the lot, but they're getting on a bit now, the plainer ones. And like I say, you've got your VSs and you've got your Suttons as well, which are amazing looking fish, and they're big, mid-40s, most of them now.
Well, look, we've got you in here to talk about line today.
Yeah.
Historically, you know, April now, early April, this time of year, people are looking to change their lines.
Yeah.
So we're going to run through some scenarios with you, because I know what one of these spools you're going to pick up first. So at the moment, we are going to put you on somewhere like K1 where there is no sort of bans in terms of any line or leaders or anything like that.
Whatever you like.
So out of all the lines we have sitting here, you're fishing a new lake, big pit, there is no bans at all on lines. What would be your choice of line?
It would, I know you think I'm going straight for the hydrosync noir, but it would depend on the distance I'm fishing. I've been using braid for, God knows, 15 years plus, most of the time for most of my fishing. And I was put onto it by a good friend of mine, Paul Forward at Mr. F. And I'm in a position now where everybody knows I use braid. And I get questions all the time across all the different social media platforms and that about braid by people thinking of going on braid. And I still feel like a bit of a pretender, if you like, because it was F that put me onto it. And he'd been using it for years before me. But I have learned a lot about braid in that period. A good sinking braid doesn't cast so well.
No.
A good casting braid doesn't sink so well, and that's just that's physics, that's science, that's something you can't get round, because the sinking part of a braid, as you know, creates a lot of friction on the spool. You know, it's heavier, it's wirier, so it doesn't cast as well. Whereas if you take away that element, it casts really well, no friction, no wiriness in the braid, but then it's going to float or be neutral at best. So it would depend on the distance I'm fishing, and now I'm going to pick up the hydrostick.
Yep. So the scenario where you're using your noir is?
Anything for me, and this depends on your casting ability. I am not a great caster, even though I've been fishing since God was a lad. I still haven't got the hang of it. Compared to like some of the casters nowadays, they've got all the stance, haven't they, with the leg in the air and the shoulder at this degree and the thing and all of that. I just fall over when I do all of that. By the time I've got all of that, it's trying to learn how to play golf, isn't it? By the time you've done everything you're told, you've lost whatever ability you had. I'm a whack it behind me and smack the hell out of it. You know, shout Geronimo and give it the big one. And with this, I'd use this up to just over 100 yards, 110 yards, something like that. And then the friction, you can hit, you know, you can tell the friction. It's just going out.
It has a limit, doesn't it?
It does, yes, because it is an incredibly good sinking braid. Very, very, very good indeed. So anything up to 110 yards, I'd go straight for that. And that's what I've got. That's what I was using on all three spools when I wound in this morning. I wound in 3 lots of this. So that is my favourite braid in the range if I'm fishing within that range.
Yeah.
I like a sinking braid, and I like this one the best. But that, you know, it's not always the case, is it? You know, sometimes you might be on a water where you need just that little bit more, and you're fishing at 120 yards, which is 30 wraps for the the new age.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if you look at this one, that's the other noir. Where's the one that isn't a noir?
Hydrosync is there, so that's a sinking braid again. I mean, obviously
it is. It's not quite as heavy as the noir.
There's more fluorocarbon strands in that to make it a lot heavier.
The fluorocarbon is what's cutting down on your distance. So to increase by whatever, you know, I don't know the percentage, but let's say 10, 15, 20% or whatever, I'd be more than happy to use hydrosync, because I know it's still sinking and it's going to give me that little bit of extra distance. It's not going to be quite as heavy as that. I mean, if you slack line with that, it just goes straight down off the tip onto the bottom.
Oh, you're peeling it off the bottom of the lake bed before you even come into contact with your lead with the noir.
Yes, obviously there are cases where you don't want that, but we're talking about an open, normal pit.
And in front of you, let's say between you and your 120 yards that you're fishing, using a sinking braid, are you worried at all about large weed beds with it being a sinking braid at all? Or is that what you're looking for?
No, I'm looking for it to go down across the contours of the bottom, whether they be weed beds, bars or whatever. I want it down there out the way.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, so a hydrosync obviously not so, and again, another just point to make out as well, do you find, especially with a hydrosync noir, because it is such a heavy line, that sometimes when you recast it again in the morning, because it's absorbed so much water, do you find it reduces the cast a little bit as well?
I can't say I've noticed that, but you do notice that on a recast, as soon as you touch the water, it's gone.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it sinks quick anyway, but twice as quick if it's soaking wet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it might knock if you were fishing at the absolute extreme range of it, it might knock a tiny bit off, but no, it's not something I've had to worry about really.
Right. Neutral buoyancy braids, because also we do our normal kinetic, which I think is this one here as well, a neutral buoyancy braid. Is that a braid you'd use at all, really, a neutral buoyancy?
I've been using that on Raspberry one all this winter.
Yeah.
I've got 6 spools with me, three reels, 6 spools. And I've got 3 spools set up with this, and 3 spools set up with that.
Yeah. It's a top and change sort of thing for the scenario, yeah.
It's all on distance. You know, a lot of the places, the spots I've been fishing are 27 to 30 wraps, so quite, you know, that's my extreme casting capability anyway. I can't cast any further than that. That's about as far as I can go. And this is what I use, and the difference in casting is unbelievable.
Yeah.
But obviously with this, you've got to use a shock leader. But it does sit high in the water. I noticed when the pike started spawning, I was getting a lot of line bites. I actually had a couple of pike caught up in it because it's not embedding into the bottom. I always use backleads with this, but it still tends to lift.
Okay.
But it tends to lift a little bit just because of the buoyancy in it. But that's what makes it, like I said before, that's what makes it a good casting braid.
Yeah, it's the thing with braid. You're stuck between a rock and a hard place sometimes with braid.
100%. But like I said, the science is what's holding you back. It just happens to be against us, really, that it's that way round and not the other way round. If the sinking elements cast better, then we wouldn't have a problem, would we? But
so with a shock lead, obviously we do the kinetic sinking shock leader. It's very tough stuff. It could be used as good link material as well, actually. But would you sort of use that so you know that maybe your last, however long your shock leader is bedded down nicely?
Yes, 2 reasons. One is in the same breaking strains, you know, you can get a much finer diameter with this. So you know, you want something when you're casting, especially at big lead, big rod, long range. You know, you don't want to be cracking off. You want to make sure you've got that sort of resistance there, that safety there, which is why I use a shock leader. But if I can get away with it, I'll use a longer shock leader to sink more of the line back from the lead.
Yep.
But you know, your standard 3 turns on the spool will give you your maximum distance. Another turn on the spool is going to cut down your distance by a few yards. 10 turns on the spool is going to cut it down significantly. It's a trade-off. It really is. There is no single braid at all that is perfect for every scenario. And I get asked, like I said, lots about braid, and I always say the same. The first thing I say, they say, can you recommend a good braid? I say, what are you trying to achieve? Yeah. You know, what do you mean? I say, what do you want to do? You know, what's your distance? Do you want it to sink? Do you want it to float? Why do you want to use braid? And then you can start to answer the question with the right braid. But for me, I always have, like I say, a spare spool for each reel with this on one and the sinking braid on the other. Then you've got everything covered.
Out of curiosity, what knot do you use for a shock leader from braid to braid?
I use, I don't know what it's called.
You're like me, I know the knots, but I don't know the names of them.
It's called curly bob knot in my head.
Right.
Because my mate Curly Bob showed me how to tie it years and years and years ago. And it's a double overhand knot on the thicker material.
Yeah.
And if you nearly tighten it, it forms almost like a butterfly.
Yeah.
2 loops, and you get your thinner material, and you go up one and back through the other, and then tighten up the overhand knot, and then you do 7 turns up, 5 turns down, and go back through the loop.
It's a bit like a Palomar in a way.
Sort of, but with this, when you tighten it down, you lick it all and tighten it down really gently, and you tweak all the ends, and you get it nice. Both ends of the knot point the same way. Both tag ends point the same way, and they point back towards the rod. So when you cast,
it goes through the rings nicer.
Yeah, and if you use like a double grinner or whatever, you get one going the wrong way, so you're getting on the cast, which is losing your distance. But this, I leave, you know, a couple of mil on the end so that it's flapping behind, and that goes through, and it's only when you're winding in that you can feel the knot going through the rings.
Okay.
And that's a curly bob knot.
Okay, there you go. Okay, another big thing that we get asked a lot, and I'm sure you probably do also, is prepping your braid to put it on your spools. Some say soak, some say don't, some say just put it on for what would your approach be to spooling up?
A lot of people with all lines, they say, oh, you're loading it wrong. You've got to load it so it's coming off the spool this way or not that way, and I've never done that. What I do is, if I'm at home, I get a bucket of water and feed it through the rod, tie it on, chuck it in the bucket of water, and I hold a cloth in my right hand, like a flannel. Yep. Hold the braid through that, because if you don't, it'll burn right through your fingers. And I hold that and I wind it wet straight onto the spool. So
literally no prepping or soaking beforehand.
No.
Which is the way I do mine, to be brutal. So straight in the bucket, straight off the spool and onto your
spool. Yeah. And I like to get the spool spinning in the bucket. Yeah. And that gives you the right sort of tension on, if you like. Yeah. Tension's so important with braid. People that are new to braid, you know, complain of frap ups and bird's nests. And generally, it's all down to the same thing. It's down to that braid being tight, loose, and the biggest cause of that.
We were talking about this the other day.
Wrapping sticks. Wrapping sticks. Yep. You see people do the wrapping sticks, put their wrapping sticks out, count off whatever, clip up 20, and then they wind. So they, you know, as if they're playing a fish. They wind, they lift. They wind, they lift, they wind. You're getting tight against the wrapping stick, loose. Tight against the wrapping stick, loose. and that's going on the spool like that.
Yeah.
So when you cast, you've got earlier coils trying to overtake the tighter coils.
Which bunches it up and...
Yeah. So
Straight.
whenever I do it, I do exactly the same. I hold the line, just literally hold it like that, so it's exactly the same tension. And
Yeah.
I hold the rod up high between the two sticks. You don't even have to go right and left. If you get it at the right height, and maybe an inch each way, and I just hold it under one tension, and that's it.
Yeah.
And the same, if I'm casting, I don't know, the lead comes off, hits the water a bit too sharply and it pops off. Don't just wind it in, hold it. It's got to be under tension.
Same
Loaded
tension
under
all the way through.
all
yeah.
the way through.
Yeah, okay, interesting.
And that'll cut that, well, that should eliminate any bird's nests or any tangles or anything.
And how much do you load onto your spools? Let's just say, look, most people are using big pit reels now.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So you were saying earlier that you sort of, depending on where you're fishing, sometimes you'll back, sometimes you won't.
Yeah.
Explain a little bit about that to me.
If I'm fishing if I'm fishing boat waters, where you can fish at any distance, then I'll load my spools from the bottom to the top.
Bottom to top.
But braid isn't cheap, and it is a bit of a waste of the braid at the bottom. Yes, some people have another spool at home or whatever, and they reverse the whole spool later on, a few months down the line, because braid gets, the end bit can get a bit tatty, and rather than cut bits off, they turn it round. What I tend to do anywhere that I'm casting is I'll just get some old braid, some old mono, go through the fishing shed, everyone's got a load of stuff, haven't they? And I'll load the spool, say halfway or whatever, and then I'll just put a bit of tape across the tag end, and then I'll tie my braid to that. So I'm packing out the bottom of the spool.
Yeah.
I'm making a shallower spool. And I'll use between two, it depends on what it comes in. I mean, ours comes in 300 metres?
On the Noirs, 300 metres and 600 metres.
So
yeah.
I'll set it up so that it takes 300 metres.
Yeah.
So I'm not using a bulk spool to fill it, because you can get a lot more than 300 metres of braid on most spools. So I'll do it with the 300 metres, and if I need to, I can reverse that. And if I need to strip it off, I'm only stripping back to my already packed spool, if you like.
Do you use, like say you've got all sorts of liquids you can put on spools nowadays to improve, almost like a silicone base or liquid. Do you use those at all?
I never have done, no.
No.
I remember once, long time ago, I had a little pot of something. It was grease lightning or something.
Yeah,
I think it was called. And I tried it just the once, and you can just dunk it in the lake, can't you, get it wet?
That's the way I do it. Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. Okay, so
Depends how much you love your reels, but I just give it a dunk.
yeah, good old splash over and if it does it. And again, so let's just go back to casting braid as well. So before, every time you'll cast with braid is almost a must, but I've seen some people not soaking the braid before. Is that something you do, is just give that spool a good splash before you, because you can weight it a bit, but...
Not really, not intentionally, no, but I tend to cast, I very rarely just cast one cast, so it's wet when it goes back on the spool, and maybe it improves as I'm trying to hit the mark. It's not always all about range, is it? It's about accuracy a lot of the time. But no, maybe I should, but I don't.
Okay, so let's talk about, again, so anyone sort of watching and listening, we're talking about monofilaments now. Your prep for monofilament, is it any different to what you do with braid in terms of preparation? Do you soak, or do you do exactly the same fashion as if you're putting on braid?
No, I mean, mono's not absorbing anything significant.
Not as much as braid, no.
No, not any significant amount of water. Again, the bucket of water is the way I do it, always. In a bucket of water. Let the spool spin, so if I was loading off of that, the spool would be in the bucket of water that way, well, this way towards me, and would be spinning, water spraying up all over the place. Again, for a cloth, just to keep that tension on it. And that's the way I've always loaded all lines. And I've not really, I haven't had a problem.
Never changed it, whatever you've done. You've always done it. So you won't soak that the night before, you'll literally go straight through the bucket. It's very similar to myself, what I do. Okay, interesting.
And I wet the cloth, by the way, for all of those loadings. The cloth, the flannel, whatever I use, will be soaking wet.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so you make sure you've got a damp cloth when you're spooling it on there. Okay. Interesting one. So obviously we're going to move on to other lines of meat. Obviously we got fluorocarbon and that there as well. Now, fluorocarbon really is an awful lot to cast distances. We've got Mirage Platinum, which is a little bit more supple. That does cast better distances, but generally with fluorocarbon, you're using it on what I class as smaller waters, or you're dropping for boat, because it is weighty, it does sit down. Do you use a lot of fluorocarbon at all? Or?
I've used it. I was fishing a lake which had, what did it have? It had various bands. Had a braid band, and it was very deep, and I wanted my lines to go down, so I used fluorocarbon for one winter. I'm not a great lover of fluorocarbon.
Okay.
I can see all the advantages.
Yeah, it's got benefits.
It's the weight, you know.
Yep.
It's got, is it 20% heavier than
Yep.
mono? So yeah, it's not something I use a lot. But if I couldn't use braid and I wanted to use a sinking braid, but I couldn't, then I think fluorocarbon would be the way if I wanted it down there for a specific reason. Personally, I find the mono sinks well enough for most situations that I want it. You know, I'd use it in. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a place for everything, isn't there?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't profess to use everything all the time. I don't. I'm primarily a braid user, and if I can't use braid, then I'll use, you know, a GR60 or the 80 that I used last time.
Okay.
I mean, going back to the GR60, I mean, how long's that been about?
Oh God, GR6 is, yeah. I mean, it's a distributed brand for us. But my God, I mean, I'm 47, and Christ almighty, that's been around.
I remember it from
many
whenever.
years.
You know? It's still being
25
used by
years.
lots of anglers
Yeah.
who know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I'd happily use it tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's one of them. If it ain't, don't fix it, isn't it?
It's
You know,
weird,
It's
yeah.
a very, very, very reliable.
Yeah,
line.
and line's a very personal thing.
Yeah.
Same with hooks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I see it on a lot of the lakes I fish in, I speak to a lot of people, and some people are like, exactly what you said, I've been using that for years. I say, try GTHD. So he says, low stretch line, and, you know, they go, you know, I'd love to, Jim, but I'll just stick to what I know.
Yeah.
And GT80 was like, almost like the GTHD predecessor in a way, and some people, we still have good sales of that, and you'll generally find it's the people just, I've been using it for years, it ain't broke, don't fix it.
There is a fair amount of stretch in the 60, I will say
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah,
if you were in a scenario where you didn't want that stretch, then you might consider one of the others.
GTHD, something like that, much lower stretch, yeah. Okay, so again, spooling up with monofilament, are you bottom to top? You don't use a backing at all for monofilaments, or will you tend to go?
No, I mean,
It's different.
It's not massively priced. It depends how much money you've got to spend on the line. That's quite a blasé thing to say, especially as you give me mine for nothing. But I've most of the time I will just load up with that. But again, if I wanted to change some, I might just strip it back and think, you know, you get 300 yards down the spool and think, oh, that'll do.
Yeah.
I'm never going to see this bit again, and then that becomes my backing.
Okay. Interesting. And another thing as well, just quickly sort of round this off a little, because we've got some really good questions that we've got in from our audience. So guys, if you're watching this, we'll read out your name and contact us, and we'll send you out a spool of maybe the GTHD tapered line. But once you've re-spooled, when you get down the lake, do you have a reach up quickly just to make sure it's bedded down again?
Yes, first cast with a newly loaded spool is always tentative. Yeah, I never, if I've loaded them all up at home, and sometimes I'll load up at the lake with exactly the same method. I just throw the spool in the edge of the lake, make sure, because some of them sink, make sure it's right in the edge so you can grab it out again, and I'll load up if I need to at the lake. But the same thing, the first couple of casts, I'm probably not even casting towards my spot. I'm just chucking it out there.
Just chuck in, mate, you swim next door. That's what I usually do.
Bosh into his 3/4 of a cast, and then, you know, a little bit more, and then think, right, okay, that's the one. I think I like it to be loaded onto the spool from winding in rather than winding on from new, if you like, before I give it the big one.
Interesting. Right, I'm going to get some questions out now, somewhere in here. Right, so we've got Steve Davis, who's struggling to load line on his snooker queue, I think. I'm only joking. Sorry, Steve, but he's a big fan of Gardner. He's been quite cheeky. He's actually got 4 questions within one, but it's some interesting. So, Dave, do you ever try to match your mainline mono to the lake bed?
No.
No?
Straight answer, no. Lake beds are very varied. People have a strange idea. I do a lot of boat fishing, so I see the reality. The colour of lake beds is very, very rarely what people think it is. The bottom of most lakes is yellow. It's sort of a sandy, even silt
Yeah.
Sort of yellowy on
We
the top.
covered this on Big Pit Carping as well, I think, didn't we? Yeah,
it's,
interesting.
you know, lots of the bottom of a lake is yellow unless it's got weed on, and then it's weedy. You know, silt is not very often like earth, brown, dark brown. You'd have to know for definite what colour it was, and no, I'm hoping that the fish don't see that line anyway, and that it's sunk down. You know, which is why I like the sinking braids and the sinking lines. It's down there and out of their way, and all they're going to come across is your baited area and the last metre.
Yeah. Okay.
I might change the last metre. You know, I might use a small leader if I'm fishing over yellow. I might not want a black leader. I might want something that's
to
a bit
match it a little bit more.
Yeah, but I don't go into great detail with it. No.
Okay. Second question that Steve asked: do you try to break up the colour of your lines with marker pens?
No,
because that was an old trait.
I did, yeah. I remember somebody, I can't remember who it was, sold a kit, didn't they? And you've got a white hook link and a pack of marker pens.
Yeah. Was it TF? Yeah,
I don't know who it was.
Matt Hayes. I remember. I do remember.
Yeah. And you just used it white and gave the marker pens to the kids and rubbed mud on it.
Years ago, we used to do it with leads. Like when I was 17, 18, we used to like paint our leads and all that. Just the Carp probably give a toss about it, probably not know.
No, not.
I think it gave me confidence, should we say.
Again,
something to do.
With hook links, you know, yes, you could match your hook link, and if you wanted to use pens, you could. But the main line, I don't think is part of that equation. No.
Okay, right. Question number 3 from Stephen. What mono is your go-to? He loves his GTH-D.
Right.
What I think you've already said it. Really, is GT8 E Plus or the GR60?
You know, it was always the GR60, but like I said, the last lot I got was the 80, and I really liked it. I thought it was really nice. But I've
You're
not
go
used the
home with
HD. Yes, it seems like that might be the one. It's a lower stretch, so.
Yeah, it's nice to fill in the drop down sometimes, I've noticed, compared to other lines as well. So you know what, we can come back on this sometime once you've played around with it and see what your thoughts are. His fourth question is, do you ever use mono? Now I know you've brought this up before actually. Do you ever use mono for your hook links?
Yeah, loads. I use mono for hook links when, and this is completely the polar opposite to what most people do. I fish mono hook links in silt. The deeper the silt, the more likely I am to use a mono hook link, a long mono hook link, and a bottom bait. Now, most people fishing in silt are trying helicopter rigs, and they're trying, you know, to balance the bait and pop up some wafters and that. I've seen carp feeding in silt. You know, you fire boilies out, they go down. There's the silt. They all go down under the silt. The fish just bury themselves, completely buried
to the gills, straight down.
Right under their feeding. That's where I want my hook bait, and I find a long mono hook link. It sinks lovely. It's got all that give in it. It goes where, you know, it works its way down into the silt with a bottom bait. That's my go-to silt rig. Okay,
and would you go up in breaking strain at all, or would you use the mono you're using on your spools to almost make the rig as well, or do you carry something
generally
separate?
Use a 15-pound for my hook links, just in case you get a bit of abrasion when you're playing a fish or whatever, even if I'm using a 12-pound. But no, 15 pounds usually me go-to, and it's just got that nice. It's got the right rigidity but suppleness. You know what I mean? It's not too soft. The rig works well, and I use a standard hair rig with it as well.
Okay, so just back to complete basics again.
Yeah,
which
just
is
like the olden days.
And it's crazy, isn't it? It's absolutely mad. So yeah, some good questions there from Stephen. Right, so we've got Paul Harriman, and he sent us this via Facebook. When there is weed or sediment which attaches itself to any line, making it appear like tow rope, or when the lake bed crust is popping up at this time of year, what do you do to avoid these scenarios, or do you just get on with it? Now, again, this was brought up on Big Pit Carping, so you know, what is your way around fishing, or you know, getting the sediment off your line? Or
the big problem as a braid user is coming calendar-wise. May generally, it's around May time, and you get the willow blossom lands on the lake.
Every angler's worst nightmare.
It's a nightmare, and with braid it's terrible. And not only, even if you can get your braid below the surface of the water, even if you're boat fishing and you go out there and you avoid every little piece of it, and I sometimes take a landing net handle without the arms and push it down as I go, all the way down, like literally pushing it into weed. We'll spend half an hour burying 100 yards of line, and you get back, you don't tighten it up too much, get it all set up, you look up there, 1 cup of tea's worth later, and it's all on the surface. Because that willow stuff, it puts like an oil, like a film, and that as soon as your braid touches it, it gets on your braid, and it makes it a floating braid. It'll make any of them a floating braid. And for about 3 or 4 weeks, I've never found really any way around it apart from swapping to mono. You know, that is a situation where I'd use mono, because mono doesn't suffer as badly as braid in that situation. Yeah, yes, it does, but not as badly.
I think with braid, it tends to cling to the fibres.
Yeah.
And it
mono's
locks into it.
completely smooth, isn't it? Completely smooth, and braid isn't. You know, when you cast, you can hear braid, you can't hear mono, as I said earlier. So yes, you don't get as much stuck to it, and it does sink back. I mean, maybe I should try fluorocarbon if I'm boat fishing in that situation. That would be the obvious answer, you know, because it's 20% heavier. And get it down there. So yeah, I would consider mono in those situations. But I've been fishing on the Island Lake a couple of years ago, and I remember waking up in the morning. I'm fishing probably 150 yards, 3 of them up against not snags but overhanging trees on the far side. So they're all extreme range, and every millimetre of braid on every rod was on the surface. Yeah, and the coots are skipping over it, and then the wind gets up, and you get
that
big
bow.
seas in all 3 of them. And then if you want to
horrible,
redo the middle rod, you can't without redoing the rod above it.
You've got to do it all again.
Because there's nowhere for your line anymore, because that one's taking up that much, and that one's taking, you know. Yeah, it's problematic. It's nature, that's made for you.
Do you sort of tend to, in this scenario, when you know this is coming, and we both chatted about it earlier, we're coming to that season where braid's a nightmare to use, so do you just sort of go by what you see out there and then just go, right, this is time to switch now?
Yes.
I've got to pull off.
Yeah, I'll use it as long as I can, and, you know, what I might do, it depends where I am in the situation, but say, for example, this may come in, and if I'm not fishing at big range, I might load up my spare spool. What I need is 9 spools, but I haven't got 9 spools, I've only got 6. Ideally, I'd have 3 spools with mono, 3 spools with the distance, and 3 spools with the single.
Yeah.
And I might get to a stage and think, do you know what? You win, nature.
Got to
Bring
switch
them
over
in,
now.
put the mono on, go out again.
Okay, right. Got one from Andrew Gull, and Andrew Gull Dave via Facebook. Do you think tapered line is worth it, or would you rather use straight through mono and a shock leader if you can't use braid, obviously?
Talk about the built-in tapers.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've sort of answered his prayers a little bit there, really.
Yes, it's worth it, because you're getting rid of the knot, and the knot is the weak point. You see people crack off casting with leaders and light line. I've done. We've all done it. Everybody's done it. If you haven't done it, you're a liar. You know, it happens. It just happens. Without a knot, it's not going to happen, is it?
No,
you've got nothing to clatter against the rings. You've got nothing to whip round, frap up, or catch on the cast. You always get one that don't quite. You know, it's all right saying, put your knot here but you just wind in sometimes and recast, don't you? It comes off as it comes off, and obviously that's not going to happen with that. So
well, to be fair, Andrew's going to get a chance because we've sent him a spool to try the taping anyway. So I think we've done him a favour there. Paul Asher 708, and this is via Instagram. Quite a long one, this. I've got to give it. Okay. How much emphasis do you place on line concealment, and would you rather choose a heavy, fast-sinking main line to get it pinned down and out of the way, or would you rather select a clear, coloured main line to be camouflaged against the water weed when fishing tight? And do you think that diameter plays a part in concealment aspect also? I can rerun that one again.
No, I got it.
It's on the ball today.
Yes, that's why I use the sinking braid as a choice. I'd prefer my line to be on the bottom. Again, going back to boat fishing, sometimes you go out there and what you've got in your head isn't what's happening, and it's shocking. You know, you're still 40 yards from your spot, and you think, especially with an engine, you're like, whoa, you've got to lift the engine and paddle because your line is this far under, and you think that's not what I was expecting at all. And it must be quite obvious to the carp. But there's another way of looking at it, isn't there? If a fish can see a line, it won't bump into it. If a fish can't see a line and it bumps into it, so if you're using something clear, is it going to be spooked more? A lot of people think, yes, that could be the case. They know they're being fished for. They're playing the percentages most of the time. But personally, as well as I can answer that, personally, I like it all on the bottom, out of the way.
Pinned down.
Unless there's a reason not to. Like, I think back, we mentioned Martin Clark earlier, didn't we?
Yep.
And we were fishing at the same time on Harefield back in the day, like way back, was that early 90s, something like that?
When it was Harefield.
Yeah, and that had gravel bars that were just horrendous. You'd get beep, 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 blah, you were cut off, done. It's gone. Nothing had happened, you were cut off. We were all using mono because braid wasn't really a thing then at all for carp fishing. I think back to that now where you're fishing, you've got 10-foot gullies, 2-foot bars, 10-foot gullies, 4-foot bars, all covered in mussels and everything. If I'd have had something like the Kinetic then, a neutral buoyancy braid, I think that would have made a massive difference.
Yeah.
I'd have fished over all those bars, deliberately having my braid, or even using all-out floating braid, as high up to the surface as I could. Yes, you'd have to suffer the geese and everything else and the drift and the stuff on your line, but when you got a bite, none of your line wouldn't already be embedded in a mussel. You just lift it up, donk, and you'd be straight to the fish. And I think that would have made a huge difference.
Think how many more carp would have been banked if you'd have had braid?
Yeah, all I need is a time machine and a spool of that. And sorted.
Well, we're working on a time machine at the moment, so I'll let you know. Okay, so that's not right. Last question here. We got one funny one at the end, actually. But Lee6002, this was sent via Instagram. Dave, my syndicate allows braided mainline, but does not allow leaders of any description.
Right.
Can braided mainline be used with tubing? If not, what would you recommend regarding fish safety and the braid not touching the fish's body, or would he just fish a lead clip without tubing?
No, I wouldn't fish a lead clip without tubing. I always like to have, I call it rubbing leaders, really, a metre or so at the end, and I'll have a PE coated braid or a PE coated fluorocarbon, like the leaders that we do, they're perfect for that.
Fuse loops, yeah.
And I just go loop to loop, bosh, which incidentally, I know it's going off question a bit, off topic here. Attaching any sort of leader to braid or even mono or anything. I've done loads of line tests, proper line tests with buckets of water and scales and until it breaks. Most knots break eventually on the knot through strangulation. Loop to loop, the main line breaks every time before the knot. So the knot is actually stronger than the main line you made it out of. So anything you're attaching, if you can do loop to loop, do loop to loop. But that's not his question at all, is it?
But interesting. Sorry, no, it was interesting. No, it was.
Refresh.
Right, refresh. So my syndicate allows braided mainline, but doesn't allow leaders of any description.
So, yes, if you can't use a rubbing leader, then I would use tubing. He's going to have fun threading the tubing.
Well, we do a tube threader, to be fair,
There
and that's
you
what
go.
you want. It's like what the match boys used to use, and we do one lead, just to let you know.
You're going to need that threader.
You're never getting braid
You're
through.
never getting braid through there. You can spit in it, you can put it underwater, you can pour your warm tea down it, all the tricks that I've tried in the past. It's not going through.
No.
Don't even bother trying, it's not happening. Back when we used to get some quite stiff, fine mono, fold it over, squash the end, feed that through to make a loop. But a threader, if you've got a threader, then a threader.
Yeah, we do like a wire threader that goes through. So that's what you need. And again, he's right. Straight from braid down to the lead clip and hook link is quite lethal for a fish.
It's not good for the fish's flanks, and it's not good for your anti-tangle properties as well. You've probably got a braided or coated braided or whatever hook link. Even if it's coated braided, you've probably stripped the end bit.
Yep.
You've got braid on braid on the cast. It's not a good situation. No. So yes, 100% I'd use tubing.
Yeah, so basically a tubing, using a threader, Lee, or like I say, a fuse loop if they allow you to use it. If they don't, then battle with it.
Generally, if they say no leaders of any kind, you're not going to be allowed to use a fused loop leader because someone's going to just look and say it's a leader and then not listen beyond that point. You can explain till you're blue in the face, but you know what it's like.
Okay, well, we come to the end of the main questions there, but one, and we can't remember who sent this because we couldn't find him, but it was just completely and utterly unrelated to anything we're talking about today, but it made us laugh. And then on research, the guys found a bit of footage of you doing this said question. And someone said in
don't know
the
if I'm
question, he
liking
just
this.
said, and it just had me in stitches. Dave, how many times have you fallen in?
Oh, right, okay. Not as bad as it could have been.
No, we'll save that one.
Can I take my shoes and socks off? Lots. I fall in lots.
Because there is a lot of footage of you, actually. We've done some. You do tend to fall in a lot.
I do. Strangely enough, my two most viewed videos ever. One was of when I refound some old footage of the Black Mirror, but even that was topped with a short clip of me doing a vlog, filming myself, set up the camera, pointed at the lake. This was at Burfield.
Yep.
And I walk on the screen, and I've got a swim rake, and I plump it down, and I open my mouth to start my spiel, and just go
just
disappear back in the lake. And I've even seen it in slow motion. As I go back, I try and grab. I think it's a single reed.
It's going to save you that, wouldn't it? Yeah.
I've fallen in so many times. I've been back at Harefield. I remember there was a swim there called Gummer's Hump, after Paul Gummer, who wrote in Hutch's book about it, who I've recently been in contact with, actually. Okay. Yeah. And you could only fish it when the water was low, because it was underwater the rest of the time. It was a gravel bar, and there was a high point in the bar, and when the water dropped a bit, it made a circle about the size. It wasn't big enough for like today's bivvies, but it was big enough for a 45-inch wavelock brolly. And I remember going out there, you had to wade out there. I planted sticks to find my way there in the dark, one of which is now a great big willow tree. And we used to go to the pub quite a bit when we fished up there. Back then, it was people would walk around the lake.
Wouldn't it?
Oh, you'd walk round one person, then there would be a group. It's like school kids getting together to play football or war or whatever. You'd have to go, even if you didn't want to go. You'd get, you're coming. It's Friday night. You're coming. Anyway, after the pub one night, came back, got on the bar in my waders, and followed my sticks out to my little brolly out there on this hump. And I've got my lead. You sort of watch it go back so you don't click it around the rod. And I've gone like that. And I've watched it go back so you don't click it around the rod. And I've watched it go back like that. And I've just gone. Of course, there's only water all around me. I've just gone splash.
Oh.
But I've done it loads. I've cast myself in, spodding. Just sort of
you've cast yourself in.
Oh yeah.
Could
I've
you
hit
just
the
go
clip and stepped forward to give it an extra like
The
2
thump.
foot. Yeah, and there wasn't 2 foot. And just gone straight in. I've fallen in loads of times. I fell in November, just gone at Yateley. I was there, and there was a wooden jetty, normal swim, wooden jetty on one side, and I walked out on the wooden jetty, and I was trying to look right, so I just stepped left. And there wasn't a jetty. Just literally stepped straight in the lake. Bosh. Freezing cold. No, it's regular.
I mean, it is dangerous nowadays. Seriously, any viewers watch this, because like my son's in, he's thinking, I want to wear waders. I'm like, son, you don't realise water goes in waders, you're bump to the bottom like that.
I've been under in chest waders.
Scary.
I again walking on a subsurface bar, waist deep, and I walked out, and it dog-legged. And I cast to where I wanted, and without thinking, I turned around and I stepped off the bar into 12 feet of water. If you do ever go in chest waders, you've got to get your feet up to the surface straight away. Yeah. Drop everything you got. Don't worry about trying to paddle or swim. Chuck your feet up to the surface, and your legs are full of air still. It's before it's had a chance to fill up, and your legs are buoyant. Yes, your top end wants to go under, but then you just
paddle backwards,
doggy paddle your way, or side stroke or whatever. And that's how I got back. But yeah, that is the thing. They can be, yeah.
Scary. Well, look, brilliant. Some really good answers there. We hope we've answered all you guys' questions. And again, for those names that picked out, drop us a private message, and we will arrange to get your line sent out to you. And Dave, thank you very much for coming in. And we'll get out of the bank with you soon. And the guys will be filming with you. So thanks, and I'll see you soon.
Well, I'm going to put that on a carrier bag first.
Yeah, take it home, mate. It's all yours. See you soon. Take care, mate. Bye.
Cheers, mate.